The cafe was loud, not the kind of loud that turned heads, but the kind that settled over the city like heat, familiar, ambient, and ordinary. Cups clinked, spoons stirred. Conversations ebbed and flowed in Arabic, Hebrew, French, the half-languages of expats and travelers. There were children tugging at mothers' sleeves, a waiter hurrying with a silver tray, an old man arguing about football, and two teenage girls laughing over something on a phone screen. No one noticed the man in the corner booth, and he liked it that way. He wore a charcoal grey shirt, sleeves rolled just above his elbows, forearms tanned and wiry. His back was straight, posture perfect. A newspaper sat unread on the table in front of him, beside a cup of mint tea that had gone lukewarm. He hadn't touched it. He wasn't here to relax. His name, at least the one he used today, was Marwan Sufyan. But that name had been abandoned more times than it had been spoken aloud. In Gaza, they still whispered his real name, not because it was sacred, but because it was feared. He had blood on his hands, carefully chosen blood. To Hamas, he was more than a field commander. He was a ghost architect, the man who made problems disappear and reappear where they hurt the most. He built networks of smugglers and encrypted routes of money, trained cell leaders in Lebanon, and coordinated attacks that never bore his fingerprints. He never appeared in propaganda videos. He never gave speeches. He never raised his voice, and that made him all the more dangerous. On the books, he didn't exist. Even his most trusted inner circle referred to him in codename only, Kari, the reader, a cruel irony for someone who never finished university because he was arrested carrying blueprints for homemade explosives in a UNICEF backpack. He never forgot the officer who slammed his head against the interrogation table that day. Years later, that same officer's car exploded on the first day of Eid. No one linked the two events, but Kari kept the officer's broken wristwatch in a drawer in Damascus for years, like a prayer. Now he was sitting in a cafe in a European capital, under a false passport, waiting to meet someone who was already 37 minutes late. He checked his watch. Again, he never liked being visible for too long. Crowds were a double-edged sword, shelter and trap. The meeting was supposed to be quick, encrypted files, a verbal update, and a list of bank transfers for munitions and medical aid routes. He had done this sort of handoff a dozen times before, but this one felt off. The waiter approached. "Still waiting, sir?" the boy asked in French-accented Arabic. "Yes," Corey replied without looking up. "But bring another tea." He smiled as the boy turned away, a small smile, calculated, practiced, every word, every movement, controlled. What Kari didn't know was that his drink would never arrive. Across the street, 3 stories above the ground floor, behind a dirty window and a shutter that hadn't been opened in weeks, a woman was speaking quietly into a radio transmitter embedded in the spine of a paperback novel. Her real name didn't matter. She had used 5 in the past year alone. The team simply called her Owl. "Target is seated. No movement. Confirming identity through facial cross-patterning now." Inside a van idling 2 blocks away, a man in his 50s sat with a laptop balanced on his knees. His hands didn't shake, though they should have. He had been part of 5 successful operations before this. All involved open-air environments. This one had walls, eyes, witnesses, noise, all the things that could go wrong, compressed into one little cafe. He pressed the mic. "Owl, give me his hand position. Right hand under the table, left near cup. No signals, no sign of backup." He nodded to himself. "Team A, hold position. Team B, stand by for convergence. Wait for the signal." There would be no gunfire, no struggle, no dramatic scene. This wasn't theater, it was elimination by architecture. Kari felt it then, that flicker in the chest that came when the instinct screamed louder than the brain. He scanned the room again, slower this time. The same faces, the same rhythm, and yet he stood. It wasn't panic. It was discipline. When something felt wrong, you moved. You didn't rationalize it. You didn't wait for the mistake to reveal itself. You removed yourself from the equation. He took one step out of the booth. The waiter returned with the tea. The two met midway. A tray, a man, a single glance. And in that blink of an instant, the man in the booth was gone. Not fled, not run. Gone. Vanished. The waiter blinked, looked confused, glanced around. "Monsieur?" Nothing. The booth was empty. The tea still steamed. Witnesses, if anyone had really been paying attention, would later say they thought the man had gone to the bathroom or stepped out for a smoke. No one saw him leave. No one saw anyone approach. No one remembered the booth being disturbed. It took 36 hours before local police even flagged the incident. A backpack left under the table, unclaimed, routine. Inside, 2 burner phones, a passport with a forged French identity, and an encrypted USB drive. They called in counterintelligence after they tried to access the drive, and it bricked the entire laptop it was plugged into. By then, Corey had been missing for over a day. Mossad never issued a statement. Israel denied involvement. Hamas blamed internal traitors. Some said he was kidnapped. Others said he had escaped, retired, vanished into the Balkans with a new face, and a clean name. But none of them knew the truth, because the operation that removed Kari from that cafe was unlike anything Mossad had executed before. Not because it was the most violent or the most dramatic, but because it was the quietest, a mission that used no bullets, no blood, just pressure, timing, and the science of control. It had taken nearly a decade to orchestrate, and it began not in that cafe but in a war room in Tel Aviv, 7 years prior. At the time, the name Kari was still buried inside field reports and fragmented testimonies. He had not yet become a ghost. He was simply a problem. The problem began with a convoy that vanished in Sinai. 3 trucks carrying medical supplies for Gaza diverted at the last moment. What should have been a minor detour became a complete disappearance. Egyptian authorities found the wreckage 2 weeks later, stripped and buried under sand. What they didn't find was the $6.2 million in cash hidden under the flooring. That was Kari's signature. He didn't steal, he rerouted, he re-engineered flows. The money had not been lost, it had been reallocated. Within months, new rocket manufacturing hubs appeared in southern Gaza, operating with materials that Western sanctions should have made impossible to acquire. He was solving equations others didn't know existed. Mossad had profiles on dozens of funders, engineers, middlemen, but the flowcharts always bent around a hole in the middle, a name no one had, a man who never appeared on call logs, never showed up on satellite footage, but whose influence warped entire regions. They found him the way one finds black holes, by studying the behavior of everything that moved around him. And once they named him Kari, they made a decision. He would not be surveilled, he would not be interrogated, he would be erased, not killed, erased, because killing left bodies, noise, diplomatic costs. But if a man disappeared completely, no one to mourn, no corpse to parade, no last words to immortalize. That was a deeper kind of power. The planning began with character reconstruction. They built his life in reverse. From the missed birthdays he never called home for, to the engineer in Marseille he had met once at a weapons expo, to the smuggler in Jordan who always changed hotels at the last second. Each thread was pulled and mapped. They didn't just learn Kari's habits, they learned his rhythms. His silence wasn't a shield, it was a pattern, and every pattern could be predicted. They knew he preferred tea over coffee, that he never sat with his back to windows, that he paid in cash except in cities where he used cloned identities already compromised and monitored. They traced his cover names. They even found one he had used a decade earlier under a dead Turkish journalist's credentials. The noose didn't tighten, it formed slowly, invisibly, until one day, Kari stepped into a cafe with full confidence. He was unknown, and by then, Mossad was already inside his meeting, inside the menu, inside the cafe's electrical layout, inside the floorboards. Because erasure begins long before the disappearance. It begins with shaping the world so that the moment a man vanishes, no one even remembers what he looked like. There's a saying in intelligence work, you can't chase a ghost, you build one. Kari wasn't hunted the way men are usually hunted. No car chases, no snipers waiting on rooftops. Instead, Mossad turned his world into a maze, tightening it inch by inch, until the exits were illusions, and every door opened toward Tel Aviv's shadow. What began as a single name on a classified report grew into a full-spectrum operation with a code name so dull, no analyst would ever leak it: Project Grainfield. To outsiders, the file looked like agricultural research funding. Inside, it was a dossier written in invisible ink, years of intercepts, psychological profiling, bank trails, and whispers from Cairo, Damascus, and Berlin. The first seed was planted by a woman named Dina Farouk. At least, that was the name on her Egyptian passport. In truth, she was born outside Haifa, trained in the Mossad's most secretive division, Neviot, the field unit for close contact operations. She'd spent years mastering Arabic dialects, customs, body language. Her specialty wasn't seduction, it was mirroring, the art of making someone see themselves reflected in another. Her assignment was simple on paper, impossible in reality. Get close enough to Kari's courier network to introduce a traceable pattern into their communication system. She began with small talk, then favors, then silence. In 2013, under the cover of a logistics firm operating between Amman and Beirut, Dina encountered one of Kari's procurement officers, a Lebanese man named Sami. He handled medical imports that doubled as cover for weapons components. Over 6 months, she became a fixture in his world. Coffee meetings, trade fairs, shared frustration about border taxes. She spoke little about herself, just enough to be familiar but never memorable. Sami thought he was leading the dance. He didn't realize every move he made was being choreographed through him. Through Sami, Dina learned how Kari communicated with his field network. He never used phones directly. Instead, he relied on intermediaries, layers of human buffers designed to absorb risk. A courier in Amman would send an encrypted message to a merchant in Cairo, who would forward it to a driver in Lebanon, who would then meet someone in Istanbul. Each person knew only their immediate contact. But hidden inside those exchanges was the faintest signature, a word that appeared irregularly across different messages: Ember. Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv caught it by accident. They assumed at first it was random noise, but Dina confirmed it was deliberate. It wasn't code, it was timing. The moment the word appeared, a shipment or transfer occurred within 48 hours. The key wasn't what Ember meant, it was when it appeared. That single linguistic fingerprint became the backbone of Project Grainfield. By monitoring traffic patterns and contextualizing that one word's movement across encrypted networks, Mossad could predict when Kari was preparing a major operation. For the first time, the image ghost had rhythm. By 2015, surveillance files on Kari filled entire encrypted drives, yet he still had no face. They had grainy images from airports, partial profiles, blurred CCTV frames, never full confirmation. He was always careful, always shifting appearances. The few who claimed to have met him described him differently. Some said tall, others average. One claimed he limped, another swore he didn't. It became clear that Kari's most powerful weapon wasn't his network, it was uncertainty. Mossad's director at the time, a man known for his clipped sentences and brutal pragmatism, issued new instructions. We stop chasing his face, we start shaping his world. And so they did. The first stage was called environmental collapse, subtle manipulations that eroded Kari's trust in his own systems without him realizing he was being manipulated. Mossad flooded false information through controlled leaks, made it appear as though one of his safe houses in Cyprus had been compromised by Syrian intelligence, and quietly removed two of his engineers through staged accidents. Each event was invisible on its own, but together they built paranoia. By 2016, Kari had stopped using his original courier structure entirely. He switched to direct encrypted communication using modified consumer devices, ironically a move Mossad had predicted and prepared for. Unbeknownst to him, the devices he adopted had been designed by a shell company Mossad had seeded into the black market tech circuit 3 years earlier. Every device came preloaded with a microscopic flaw, an error invisible in code but exploitable through radio frequency manipulation. It meant that whenever Kari used his supposedly secure line, Mossad could listen, not to the words, they were still encrypted, but to the metadata, the tone, duration, frequency, pauses, enough to reconstruct behavioral signatures. They began mapping his voice patterns into a behavioral model. When he was calm, he spoke in measured bursts of 4 to 6 seconds. When anxious, his words shortened. When he lied, he inhaled mid-sentence. Over thousands of fragments, an emotional profile emerged. Kari, the myth, was replaced by a pattern of breathing, a collection of silences, a ghost shaped out of sound. The team tasked with interpreting those signals was small: 5 analysts, 2 field operatives, 1 psychologist. They worked from a windowless floor below the Mossad's technological division, a space colloquially called the basement. In early 2017, the basement intercepted a transmission anomaly, a conversation from Kari to an unknown contact where his stress patterns spiked dramatically. The metadata pointed to Europe, cross-referencing airline logs, financial movements, and the Ember pattern revealed the target city, Marseille. That was the first confirmed sighting in over a decade. Field surveillance teams were mobilized. Over the next 6 months, Kari was tracked through 3 European countries. He moved with precision, no digital traces, cash only, disposable SIM cards, constantly alternating between low-profile neighborhoods. He never stayed anywhere longer than 3 nights. But in Paris, he broke his rule. He stayed 5, and in those 5 days, Mossad finally saw his face. The image came from a traffic camera near Place de la République, a man in a grey coat, carrying a briefcase, crossing the street at dawn. The face was partially shadowed, but enough features matched the composites built from witness reports: the jawline, the set of the shoulders, the slight dip of the head when walking. Facial recognition algorithms assigned an 82% probability. The man who had been theory for 10 years was suddenly real, but something was off. The analysts noticed inconsistencies. The man's gait was different from past reports. His left hand trembled slightly. Subsequent images revealed a pattern. He was using his right hand more often than expected. That tiny detail told them everything. He was aging. Fatigue had set in. The perfectionist ghost was becoming human again, and humans make mistakes. It was enough for the director to authorize the next stage: containment. This phase wasn't about killing him, it was about closing the net. Agents began infiltrating the outer layers of his European network: his driver in Marseille, his document forger in Athens, his banker in Zurich. None of them were arrested or confronted. They were simply compromised, turned quietly or nudged out of the picture, replaced by assets who looked identical on paper but reported elsewhere. It was slow, painfully slow, but necessary. The goal wasn't to spook him, It was to let him walk straight into a perfectly crafted illusion of his own safety. One of those illusions was a café. In 2018, Mossad quietly purchased an old building on a busy street corner in a European capital. It was renovated, leased under a local hospitality group, and opened as a boutique café known for its North African mint tea and pastries. Tourists loved it. Locals too. It became background noise in the city's rhythm. For 4 years, that café existed with no purpose other than to wait. Every chair, every fixture, every hidden fiber-optic camera was installed for one specific day that no one could predict. Until February 2020, when the Ember signal resurfaced again. A new pattern, a new operation, a meeting, the predicted location, the café. Quarry was coming. When Dina, now going by a different name, heard the confirmation, she didn't smile. She just nodded once. She'd been part of this web since the beginning. She had watched it spin and grow, layer upon layer of patience. And now, all the mathematics were aligning. Her job this time was simple. Sit 3 tables away, reading a novel whose cover concealed a transmitter. Observe, confirm identity, signal the moment of readiness. The rest would be handled by the others. There were 6 operatives in total. 4 inside the café, 2 outside. None of them carried visible weapons. Their instruments were micro-devices, electromagnetic pulses, anesthetic agents, and a piece of technology that had never been publicly acknowledged by any government. It was a prototype derived from a joint experiment between Mossad and a private biotech lab, a system that could render a human unconscious within seconds using targeted neurochemical release, odorless, contact-based, non-lethal, but capable of inducing temporary paralysis and memory disruption. The trigger would be embedded in the environment, a glass, a surface, a touch, and once activated, the target would appear to faint, recover within minutes, and never recall what happened. At least that was the official description. But Project Grainfield's real goal was not temporary paralysis. It was disappearance. Every operation has a moral pivot, the point where justification becomes blur. For the operatives, this was it. They had spent years constructing an invisible architecture to erase a man. Some believed he deserved it. Some wondered if they were erasing a myth rather than a monster. But by then, it didn't matter. The bureaucracy had its own gravity. Once an operation was in motion, it consumed everything around it until only the mission remained. In January 2022, the order came through encrypted channels. Phase final begins upon confirmation of contact. No secondary engagement, no recovery, no traces. And just like that, 10 years of pursuit converged toward one ordinary afternoon. The city didn't notice the shift. The cafe continued its rhythm, cups clinking, spoons stirring, conversations blending into the hum of life, and at 2:16 p.m., the man they called Kari walked through the door. He had no idea the walls already knew his heartbeat. There were 26 people in the cafe that afternoon. The youngest was a 3-year-old boy eating a melting pistachio ice cream. The oldest, a retired German professor seated by the window, scribbling in a leather-bound notebook. No one knew that 8 of the patrons had entered on forged passports. 4 were Israeli citizens under different names. 3 were operatives trained in pharmaceutical dispersal. 1 was the technician responsible for controlling the electromagnetic shielding embedded in the back wall of the cafe. Outside, traffic moved as it always did. Dogs barked. Street vendors peddled knockoff handbags. A nearby church bell rang exactly at 2:15 p.m. And 1 minute later, Quarry walked into a scene that had been waiting years for him to arrive. He didn't recognize anyone. Of course he didn't. That was the point. To him, the cafe was nondescript. Too cheap to be upscale, too clean to be a dive. He liked places like this. Unremarkable. Places that never ended up in surveillance photos because no one remembered having been there. He scanned the room once, reflexively checking for exits, windows, irregularities. A waiter passed him and nodded. Nothing stood out. He chose a seat in the rear corner, back to the wall, eyes on the entrance, just like always. The table had been chosen for him 6 years ago. Mossad operatives have a term, compression. It means narrowing a target's options without alerting them that choices are being removed. It's the art of shrinking someone's world until the only safe place is the place you want them to be. Everything Kari saw when he entered had been carefully curated through compression. The front tables had subtle asymmetries, a broken chair leg here, an uneven floorboard there. The music was slightly louder in the front half of the room. A baby cried on the left side near the window. All things that nudged a pattern-oriented man like Quarry toward the back right corner. The air conditioning vent above his booth was calibrated to blow slightly cooler. The lighting above cast a gentle shadow that made his booth more private. Quarry didn't sit there because it was random. He sat there because someone had spent years learning exactly what kind of discomfort would make a man like him move 5 steps further into the trap. The table was wiped clean by a staff member wearing gloves, but the surface had been treated with a chemical called neurothane 8, a synthesized compound designed to bond with skin through direct contact and enter the bloodstream within 30 seconds. Tasteless, odorless, completely undetectable without a full toxicology scan. The compound was developed not to kill, but to induce a rapid onset vasovagal response, slight confusion, loss of balance, and in rare cases, temporary blackout. Corey placed his hand on the table, fingertips brushing its surface. He always did this before ordering. It was a tic, something he never noticed himself doing. Mossad analysts had spotted it in footage from a Beirut coffee shop 7 years prior. The gesture was subtle, but repeated. His skin absorbed the compound. He called the waiter, ordered tea. At that precise moment, 40 meters away in a black utility van parked beside a florist, a man in his 40s was watching biometric telemetry through a custom tablet connected to electromagnetic sensors embedded under the booth. The sensors had been woven into the floor a year earlier under the guise of plumbing work. They tracked pulse rate, sweat patterns, and foot pressure. They had Kari's baseline biometric profile down to 5 decimals. At 217/34, his heart rate changed. Not dramatically, but enough. The technician tapped his mic. Phase 1 confirmed. Initiate mask layer. Inside the cafe, nothing changed. To the customers, it was just another minute. But in the booth, 3 tables away, Dina, reading her book, turned a page and pressed a tiny button embedded under the paper. It sent an encrypted signal that activated a light electromagnetic pulse, altering the signal flow of security cameras in a 4-block radius. For the next 90 seconds, every surveillance camera in the area, including municipal traffic cams, looped prior footage of the street. Outside, the world kept turning. Inside, time bent. Kari's breath hitched. Not panic, just a single breath that caught mid-inhale. He blinked, rubbed the side of his temple. It felt warm inside the cafe all of a sudden. The tea hadn't arrived yet. His watch showed 2:18. He tried to focus on the menu again, but the letters blurred slightly, just enough to be annoying. He glanced toward the waiter. The man approaching him with the tray wasn't the same boy who took his order. This man was older, mid-30s. Olive skin, neutral expression. He didn't make eye contact. The cup trembled slightly on the saucer as he set it down. Kari noticed. He always noticed things like that. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. The man turned and walked away. At the next table, a woman dropped her purse. A man stood up near the bathroom. The old professor near the window sneezed violently. 3 distractions. Time to the second. By the time anyone might have looked back at Kari's booth, he was slumped sideways. Not dramatically, not with a crash, just slightly tilted, as if he'd dozed off or lost his balance. The teacup sat untouched. Within 10 seconds, a young woman, a nurse on her day off, who was actually a trained field medic, stood up, gasped, and hurried over. "Sir, are you all right?" No response. She turned to the room. "I think he fainted." Exactly what they wanted someone to say. Across the room, the real operation began. A second team moved in. 2 men, posing as EMTs on break, entered from the side door with small kits. The cafe staff recognized them from earlier in the week. They'd been there 3 days in a row, always friendly, always tipping well. They surrounded the booth. The medic checked Quarry's vitals, spoke quickly in French. "Looks like dehydration, might be low blood pressure. Let's bring him outside for air." The staff nodded. The patrons barely watched. The men lifted him gently with practiced ease. One held a nasal cannula near his face, standard procedure for someone who fainted. The tube, however, was delivering not oxygen but a second compound designed to deepen the blackout without triggering respiratory failure. Within moments, Kari was unconscious. His heart rate slowed. He was still breathing. He looked normal. They carried him outside. From collapse to extraction, 52 seconds. What happened next was not improvisation. It was the final act of a script rehearsed for months. The utility van's rear doors opened. Kari was laid on a stretcher and covered with a neutral-toned blanket. No lights, no sirens, just a slow, steady exit. The van pulled away at normal speed. Within 2 minutes, it had vanished into city traffic. The signal jamming field deactivated. Cameras resumed normal feed. To every eyewitness, a man had fainted and been taken away by helpful paramedics. They forgot him within an hour. Inside the van, the atmosphere was quiet. No celebration, no high fives, just measured professionalism. The technician checked Quarry's vitals, still stable. He pressed a patch to Quarry's neck, a compound that would keep him under for exactly 2 hours. They had 120 minutes to reach the black site. The route was pre-mapped. The license plates were changed mid-drive using motorized flippers. Drones flew ahead to clear intersections. When the van arrived at its destination, an underground facility beneath an abandoned construction project, the personnel waiting had already begun preparing the isolation chamber. Kari would wake up inside a room with no windows, no clocks, No identifiable sounds. He would not know where he was, how long he had been out, or what had happened. He would not scream because he would not speak. They had prepared for that too. A medical team from Unit 8200 had developed a regimen of neural inhibitors, non-invasive temporary compounds that dulled executive cognitive functions. Not torture, not sedation, just stillness, enough to keep his mind fogged, his focus off balance. He wouldn't be questioned, not immediately, because the real goal wasn't to interrogate him, it was to unmake him. In Tel Aviv, the mission was marked green, success, 0 casualties, 0 exposure, 0 trace. The director received the final confirmation at 3:41 p.m. He responded with a single word, buried. The field operatives were extracted by separate routes. The cafe was cleaned. The agents who had been posing as baristas and waiters disappeared into routine lives. The cafe would close 3 days later for renovation. It would never reopen. The name Quarry was retired from active targeting databases because there was no longer a man to target. He was gone. But disappearance is not erasure, not truly, because across Gaza, Damascus, and Istanbul, messages began circulating within hours. He never showed up. He missed a secure check-in. Something's wrong. At first, his absence was attributed to caution, then to internal betrayal. A few claimed he was taken by Americans. Others insisted he fled, but no one had proof. No photos, no videos, no body, and that made it worse, because a martyr could be buried. But a ghost? A ghost could haunt forever. The panic didn't start with screams. It started with silence. On the encrypted channel known only to his top 3 lieutenants, the routine check-in at 18 Qua UTC passed unanswered. They didn't worry, not at first. Kari had skipped communications before. Sometimes he moved unpredictably on purpose, especially when he suspected surveillance. He had gone dark for up to 72 hours in the past. It was part of his legend. But the next day, a second check-in time passed. Then another. By the third silence, something deeper than concern took root. One of his men, a young logistics specialist in Istanbul, tried a direct line. The number rang once, then disconnected. He tried again, same result. It was a kill switch, Kari's own failsafe, triggered only under extreme compromise. The line's deactivation wasn't a mistake. It was a warning. The ghost had gone quiet, and that terrified them. For Hamas's external operations wing, Kari's silence was more than just a leadership vacuum. It was a fracture in the architecture. He didn't run cells. He linked them. He was the keystone in the arch, the silent man who controlled the movement of materials, the encryption of bank transfers, the curation of middlemen across 4 continents. His disappearance wasn't a gap. It was a gravitational shift. In Beirut, a courier paused a scheduled delivery of chemical components. In Cairo, a banker flagged a transfer and blocked it. In northern Sinai, a shipment of small arms sat in the desert for 3 extra days waiting for confirmation that would never come. Entire branches of Hamas's support infrastructure, designed to function in isolation, began to fail simultaneously, not because they were compromised, but because their creator was missing. At first, senior Hamas leadership didn't admit what had happened. In closed sessions, they assured each other Kari was exercising extreme caution, that he'd resurface soon, that he was probably watching them panic and laughing from a safe house somewhere. But the denials didn't last. When a high-level weapons broker in Sarajevo received a message supposedly from Kari but detected inconsistencies in phrasing and syntax, alarm bells rang. Kari was known for obsessive linguistic consistency. He used the same 3 closing words in every transmission. Balance above chaos. The message ended differently. That was enough. He cut all communication and went underground. The signal was clear. The ghost wasn't watching. The ghost had vanished. Back in Israel, Mossad analysts monitored the chaos. Unit 8200's signal intelligence arrays lit up as panic-coded transmissions increased. Messages were rerouted. Channels shifted frequencies. Secure nodes went dark entirely. It was like watching the circulatory system of a vast organism seize. Disinformation protocols kicked in. A forged message was planted in a darknet forum frequented by Arab militants, implying that Kari had been spotted in Algeria, near the border with Tunisia. Another leak in Lebanon claimed he was captured by Iranian intelligence over an internal betrayal. A doctored image circulated briefly, grainy CCTV footage of a man resembling Kari entering a hospital in Alexandria under armed guard. None of it was true, and that was the point. Every false lead created doubt. Every rumor deepened the mystery. Every shadow they chased pulled them further from the truth. Because a disappearance doesn't just remove a person, it infects belief. For Kari's closest lieutenants, the emotional toll was immediate. Not just fear, but something more destabilizing, the erosion of certainty. Kari had been the compass, the one man they believed saw 5 moves ahead. If he could vanish, if he could be taken, then what did that mean for the rest of them? Some turned inward, others turned on each other. In Beirut, Two mid-level commanders accused each other of betrayal. One was shot outside a bakery 2 nights later. In Istanbul, a warehouse holding dual-use electronics was torched from the inside, likely by someone trying to erase evidence in case Mossad was watching. Paranoia wasn't an infection. It was an avalanche. Mossad didn't need to dismantle Kari's empire. His absence did it for them. Inside the black site, Kari remained still. 3 days passed before he opened his eyes. He didn't scream. He didn't demand answers. He simply looked at the ceiling, grey, seamless, silent, then closed his eyes again. The team watching from the other side of the two-way mirror recorded every movement. No clocks, no voices, no indicators of day or night. They didn't interrogate him, they didn't touch him, they just waited. Because the objective was not to extract information, it was to alter perception. Mossad psychologists had studied high-functioning field commanders for decades. Men like Kari weren't broken through pain, they were broken through dislocation. Remove structure, remove pattern, let the mind crumble inward. After 5 days, they gave him water. On day 6, a meal. On day 7, a voice, filtered through a speaker, neutral in tone. Do you know how long you've been here? No answer. Another 2 days passed, then another voice, different accent. Your team believes you betrayed them. Still nothing. By the end of the 2nd week, Kari had eaten 6 times, drunk 10 liters of water, slept intermittently. He hadn't spoken, but his breathing changed when the 2nd voice played. A twitch in the jaw, a shift in the pupil, emotion, contained but present. The team marked it. They played the voice again, then added another layer, a report from Gaza, true but unconfirmed, of his second-in-command being executed. A lie, but a carefully crafted one. The news was delivered as a recorded broadcast, muffled as though intercepted. He listened, still no speech. But when he closed his eyes after that broadcast, he didn't sleep for 36 hours. On the outside, the world moved on. The war in Syria escalated. Iran held naval drills in the Gulf. Israel quietly struck a weapons convoy in southern Lebanon. No one publicly asked about Kari. Even among his enemies, his name wasn't spoken aloud. That was part of Mossad's long game. The less he was mentioned, the more he disappeared from history. They knew Hamas wouldn't admit he was taken, because doing so meant acknowledging they could be infiltrated at the highest levels. Better to say, he defected, or that he died in secret, or never existed at all. Disappearance as strategy, erasure as warfare. But within Mossad, not everyone felt victory. The field operatives had done their jobs perfectly, but quietly, in private, some wrestled with what they'd done. Dina, who had tracked Kari's network for nearly a decade, left active service 6 months after the mission, officially for family reasons. In her final report, she wrote a single sentence. He was a monster, but we became architects of silence. Her words circulated within the directorate. Some dismissed it as fatigue. Others understood exactly what she meant, because something had shifted. The mission had succeeded. But what was the cost of building a machine that could make a man vanish so completely that not even his enemies knew what had happened? What line had been crossed when assassination evolved past violence into disappearance? Inside the black site, Kari finally spoke on day 23, not to his captors, not to the ceiling, to himself. A single word: balance. The microphones picked it up. Later that day, he refused food for the first time, and that night, he clawed a single scratch into the wall, not enough to break the surface, just enough to mark it. He was still there, still thinking, still planning. The ghost, it seemed, had not been fully erased. Not yet. The final phase of the operation wasn't called extraction. That had already happened. It wasn't containment either. That was complete. Internally, Mossad referred to the last stage of Project Grainfield by a colder name: dissolution. To the field operatives, it meant tying off every thread that could unravel under scrutiny. To the analysts, it meant purging data trails. But to the men and women overseeing Kari's silent imprisonment, it meant something far more difficult: deciding what to do with him. Because the truth was, Mossad had never planned this far. For years, Kari had been a riddle, a ghost who created networks out of smoke and fire. Now that they had him, not dead, not publicly destroyed, but silenced, there was a quiet disagreement among the leadership. Some argued for prolonged isolation. Others wanted a deep interrogation, a slow peeling away of knowledge until nothing was left. A few suggested psychological collapse could be weaponized. Turn him, plant him back inside Hamas as a broken relic, a man who couldn't even remember who he once was. But one voice cut through all the rest: the director himself. In a classified briefing attended by only 8 individuals, he laid down the final directive. He is not to be broken, he is not to be paraded, he is to be forgotten. The room was silent. He continued, "We don't destroy myths by fighting them. We destroy them by removing the stage they perform on." It wasn't about killing Kari, it was about making him irrelevant. In the black site, Kari was moved to a different wing. The lights were warmer, the sounds more natural. He was given access to books, not political texts, not religious ones, but neutral material: physics, geography, mathematics. He wasn't told where he was. He wasn't asked. questions. The guards never addressed him directly. Time became a circle. He scratched symbols into the wall. He stopped, then started again. Some nights, he whispered numbers into the dark, as if working through equations. The medical staff watched. Once, he asked for a pencil. They gave him one. He filled 2 full notebooks, one with coordinates, the other with a strange hybrid language, Arabic grammar embedded with fragments of Hebrew, Turkish, and Persian, a language only he understood, and maybe that was the point. On the outside, Mossad began reaping the rewards of his absence. Within 6 months, 5 previously invisible bank accounts used by Hamas's overseas financial web had gone dark, not because they were traced, but because Qari wasn't there to maintain the illusions. 2 covert rocket supply chains in the Sinai collapsed. 3 couriers were arrested in Turkey, exposed by behavioral patterns they had never masked before, because they never had to. Without Qari orchestrating movement, the system sputtered, then fractured, and all the while, no official word was ever spoken. Not by Israel, not by Hamas, not by anyone. Because what do you call a war that ends with silence? 1 year after the operation, a rumor spread through a secure forum used by journalists in Beirut. It claimed that Qari had been seen in the mountains near the Georgian border, living under an assumed name. The photo was blurry. The man's face was turned away. The caption read, "The lion sleeps." Hamas refused to comment. Western outlets didn't publish it, but the rumor took root. That was enough. Disinformation worked best when it told the truth sideways. Let them believe he'd fled. Let them whisper that he'd abandoned the cause. Let the myth die in fragments. Inside the black site, Qari remained unchanged. They had given him a name now, not his own, just something to help staff refer to him in logs. Subject 37K. He responded to it, sometimes. He never spoke of the past. He never asked where he was. One guard said he looked like a man who had outlived his purpose. Another, younger, said he looked like someone watching the world end in slow motion, but neither could say what Qari believed. He held his silence like a shield, and Mossad let him keep it. Back in Tel Aviv, the operation file was closed. Physically, digitally, emotionally. The cafe where it all happened was torn down. The street now had a convenience store where the espresso machine used to hiss steam. No plaque, no sign, just new concrete poured over the exact spot where a man vanished while waiting for tea that never arrived. But inside the Mossad archives, far from sunlight, there was one final document, locked, encrypted, known to only 3 people. It wasn't a report, it was a memo, written by the deputy director who had overseen Project Grainfield's planning since the beginning. The memo was never meant to be read aloud. It was written for the future, and it said this: "We won, but I don't know what we became in the process. We erased a ghost, we removed a threat, but I wonder if we also built a machine that doesn't know how to stop once it starts. Mossad used to fight to protect something. Now I wonder if we've become guardians of absence, curators of silence so precise we don't even hear ourselves anymore." The memo ends with a single sentence. "When you build a prison so perfect, the first prisoner is always yourself. Qari is still alive. That much is known. Some say he's in a facility under the earth so deep that signals can't penetrate. Others believe he's dead, and that Mossad merely pretends to hold him as a form of psychological warfare. But the truth is stranger. He breathes, he writes, he remembers, and somewhere, in a cell built with silence, he scratches one final phrase into the stone beneath his bed each night. Balance above chaos. His old mantra, his last rebellion. And maybe in a world where men can vanish between sips of tea, that's the only truth that still matters.